let's talk about cross-cultural grief a little bit. You know, when I first started working with grief back in the late 1970s, I was confused because the women tended to talk a lot and would emote and openly emote and cry, and the men weren't like that at all. It didn't make any sense to me. It didn't add up because I'd been taught in graduate school to kind of help people through talking about it, and that wasn't working very well. And then I bumped into this research from anthropologists on cross-cultural grief, that is, indigenous groups who grieved and exactly how they did it, and it really opened me up and it taught me a lot. And I realized at that point that truly the United States, we were the primitives. I mean, we were really primitive, and these people are the experts. They've been doing this for thousands of years, and it's just amazing what I started to see. And of course, the bottom line of what I saw was that the indigenous people, when there was a death and a funeral, they would almost always give the men things to do. They'd give them actions to do, and they'd give the women a place to emote, and also actions sometimes. But it showed me right off the bat that, oh wow, this is a difference. And because men in our culture, of course, don't have anything to do after death because we have subcontracted all of the things to do. So anyway, I started studying these, and I realized that I could learn a lot about grief just from looking at the details of the way they handled it and what they did and how they did it. So I started studying and started reading more and more and more studies about indigenous people and their grief rituals. And I found some fascinating things. And of course, the first thing that struck me was that the indigenous people have a very different sense of community. You know, they are interconnected in a profound way that we simply are not. Most of them have the same worldview, most of them live right next to each other, most of them work as a part of a group, that group. You know, you contrast that with our culture, where what happens, you know, we all work in different places, we may be living in the same neighborhood, but we have different worldviews, we have different religions, we have different thises and different that's. So, one of the main differences is that first part about community. You know, in some ways, the indigenous tribes are kind of like our families, you know, because of their interdependence, the way they depend on each other, the way they are interconnected in so many different ways, is kind of like the way our families are, rather than our culture, because our culture is so diverse and has so many different elements that there's not that same kind of commonality that you get with an indigenous group of people. At any rate, that was one of the things I saw, all the interconnectedness and the very profound sense of community. You know, when someone in an indigenous group of people died, everything stopped. These funerals lasted 3 days, and everything stopped. No one said, well, you know, I've got a vacation planned. Forget about it. Everything stopped. And they talk about, the Dagura people talk about the mighty power of death. You know, we bow to the mighty power of death, and that everyone stops everything that they're doing. Very different, isn't it, from what we're used to here? Because we kind of say, well, you know, I can't make that. I've got this and that to do. But the indigenous people drop it all. They say, that's it. You know, this is death. We've got to deal with this straight up, and they do. But they're living in communities where they're interconnected. Their worldview is very similar, and it's just a different kind of space than we have here, and it makes it much easier then for them to have rituals where everyone can participate. One of the things they do in these rituals is that they make sure that they mark the griever. And by marking the griever, I mean they make it visible so you can tell who's grieving and who's not. You know, in the United States, when you go to a function, say a lecture, and you see 200 people in the audience, you can't scan that group and go, oh, that person's grieving, and that person's grieving. You can't do it because grief is invisible in our culture. You cannot see it. You know, we lost the black armband, was one of the last things to go, and that told people, or wearing black, that told people, oh, that person is bereaved. Well, the indigenous people have fantastic ways to tell people who is bereaved and who is not. Sometimes they'll knock out a certain tooth, and that shows you. Sometimes they will paint the body in certain ways. There's a tribe in Africa where they paint the grief history onto their shoulder. So you can tell by looking at them who's died and when they died. It's fantastic. Hair is another important thing for the indigenous folks. You know, hair kind of marks life in a way. And so when they have these grief rituals, a part of it usually is that the hair is either allowed to grow or is cut in a certain way so you can tell, aha, that person is bereaved. So it's hair, knock out a tooth, painting things. The men will let their beard grow or they'll shave in a certain way. Some tribes, they even cut off a finger after a significant loss. So all of these things make this grief visible. They can see who is and who is not grieving. You know, the wonderful thing that they do too is that sometimes they will forbid a certain food when someone's grieving. They forbid a food like blackberries, say. When you're grieving, you cannot eat blackberries. And then when the tribe gets to the point where the elders feel as though that person is ready to re-enter the tribe as a non-grieving person, they have a ceremony where the whole tribe gets together and they go and they present this person with the food that has been previously banned. And that tells the person, oh, okay, I'm back in. Because I cannot tell you how many times I've talked with people in therapy over the years and they say, you know, am I finished with this yet? Is this over? Is this too long? Is this too short? No one really knows exactly how long it should or shouldn't be. The indigenous people found a way to let people know how long it should be. Very clever and very potent rituals, and we'll see as we go along. Next we're going to look at two different tribes. One is the Yolngu tribe from Australia, and the other is the Dagura tribe in Africa. And we'll go through their rituals, and you'll see what I'm talking about as we go through the rituals, see how they work things, and see what happens. We'll look forward to that.